In this video, I want to talk about complex writing. This means writing about two or more contrasting ideas in one paragraph or essay. If you understand how to deal with complex writing, you'll see dramatically improved scores on your assignments, provincial exams, and college entry tests. If you bear with me, I think you'll be pleased with the improvement in your writing. The biggest challenge is to write about two different viewpoints without contradicting yourself. A basic rule in logic is that if something is true, its exact opposite can't also be true at the same time. This is called the Law of Non-Contradiction. In other words, you can't argue that watching TV is better than reading, and then say immediately afterwards that reading is better than watching TV. When students make this sort of argument, they usually mean to say that some parts of a proposition are true, while other parts of its opposite are also true. Parts of watching TV are good, but there are different kinds of benefits from reading. The trick is to be precise with your arguments and your language, and to use effective transitions. If you're careful, you can write about contradictory viewpoints without sounding contradictory. If you're a little confused about this, let's take a look at a good example of a complex paragraph written by a former student of mine. She is responding to a common question from a provincial exam. Accompanying this video is a downloadable example of the paragraph. If you haven't done so already, please download the document, read the paragraph, and perhaps take notes on its organizational structure. I'd recommend pausing now and coming back when you're done. So let's return to the paragraph. The command phrase in this exam question is "to what extent?" To what extent implies a matter of degree. In other words, something may be true to a small, partial, or large extent, and not completely true or false. This in turn suggests there are opposing ideas that we should consider. In this case, the student is being asked to consider the extent to which the 1920s were good years for Americans. It asks for a generalization that is sure to have different points of view. The topic sentence is simple but effective. It restates the topic, which makes it clear to the marker or reader that the writer has understood the question. Moreover, it inserts a clear thesis by using the phrase "to a large extent." This implies that it wasn't a completely wonderful era. The task at hand is to prove that the 1920s were generally good, but that some elements were not. This helps qualify our argument and avoid a harsh contradiction. It also provides us with a clear but defensible thesis. The next section starts with a concessionary transition, "to be sure." A concession means that our basic thesis is not completely true. We are conceding part of our ground, but not most of it, to an opposing perspective. In this case, a few examples are given which oppose the general thesis without overwhelming it. You'll notice that we're not really rebutting the opposing viewpoint. We are using the tactic of accommodating rather than refuting a contrary point of view. We then bring back the argument to support the general thesis with a contrast transition. It contrasts with the preceding examples, but not with the general thesis. In fact, this entire sentence attempts to provide a reason why the second set of examples is generally more significant than the first. This is a critical juncture in the paragraph. The pro-thesis examples are further divided into two sections. The first section focuses on social and cultural changes, while the second section discusses the economy. The writer has used common transitions, but hasn't overused them. The concluding section starts here. It doesn't use a concluding transition, but one could be used if desired. Notice how the conclusion extends the opening thesis and generally explains why the thesis is true. It doesn't introduce new evidence, but it doesn't just restate the first sentence. In terms of the paragraph as a whole, the order of argument is important. We start with the antithesis examples to get them out of the way. Unlike newspaper articles, formal writing is to be read to the end, so we must finish strongly. Like a politician who raises taxes right after an election and holds all of her popular policies to the last year of her term, a writer gets the opposing ideas out of the way and finishes with many examples that support the thesis. Finishing strongly is a basic rule of effective rhetoric. Also, note that the examples don't go back and forth. All the examples are grouped. The antithesis examples go first, and the prothesis examples second and in order. Notice too that there are more examples in the second part of the body. You would hardly be an effective writer if you had more examples to support a contrary position. You'd be amazed how many times that happens. If that does happen, you should change your overall thesis. Another point is that this paragraph could easily be turned into an essay. The introductory and concluding sentences could be turned into paragraphs, and the body sections could also be made into body paragraphs. They would each need a topic and concluding sentence, and specific examples, including quotations. But the logic would remain the same. Like all effective arguments, you start with a proposition, you provide evidence, and then you explain why the evidence supports the proposition. If there are contrary ideas, you don't ignore them. You demonstrate your sophisticated understanding of the topic by acknowledging them at the beginning and incorporating them into your larger point of view. Complex writing is a great way of increasing your mark in formal assignments and exams. As we have seen, to what extent questions, which are increasingly common in provincial exams, usually imply 2 points of view. Your ability to write effectively about both sides will set you apart from most writers, who normally focus on one perspective. Likewise, open-ended questions like those found in English 12 and college entry tests work best if you don't agree with them completely. Here's an example. Confidence comes from the support of others. There's nothing wrong with this statement, and I'm sure it's true in large measure. But it's not sufficient. Most writers will rattle off a whole bunch of examples that show how the support of others has indeed given them confidence. Yet wouldn't it be more interesting if we said something more complicated? If we argued that confidence can also come from other things like experience and inner resolve, we would have a much more interesting essay. You don't have to disagree totally. What you are doing is weighing different points of view in a critical manner. In my experience, this kind of complex response gets a much higher mark. So don't follow the crowd, and don't look at the world from one perspective only. If you're willing to write in a complex manner, your marks will reflect your more thoughtful and sophisticated outlook on life.